Optional Restoration Talents. Subtlety reduces the threat caused by your restoration spells by 10, 20, or 30% and reduces the chance for heal and damaging over time spells to be dispelled by a percentage based on the rank of the talent you take. Tranquil Spirit reduces the mana cost of Healing Touch, Nourish, and Tranquility by 2% per point that you spend in taking this talent. I recommend putting 1 point in this talent. The Empowered Touch talent increases the amount healed by Healing Touch and Nourish by 20% and 10% respectively. Since neither of these spells are used as often as our heal over times, I do not recommend putting any points into this talent. Natural Perfection is a talent that increases your critical strike chance with all spells by 1% per point in the talent, and upon receiving a damaging critical strike, you gain a buff that reduces damage taken by 2% for 12 seconds, which goes up by 2% for each point in the talent as well. The buff will stack up to 3 times. I recommend putting 1 point into this talent. Living Seed will place a seed on a friendly target of yours that has received a spell critical strike. On the next attack, the seed will bloom and heal them for 30% of the initial amount healed. I recommend putting all 3 points into this talent. Revitalize is similar to Replenishment, but doesn't have near the uptime that Replenishment does. Revitalize gives your Rejuvenation and Wild Growth spells a 15% chance to restore 8 energy, 4 rage, 1% mana, or 16 runic power per tick. This may not sound like a lot, but over the course of a fight, these small restorations of power can be very helpful in sustaining threat, damage, or healing. I recommend putting all 3 points into this talent as well. That should cover any questions you may have about talents. I'm going to move on to gearing, gemming, and glyphs for the next part of the guide. Glyphs are up next. Major glyphs that I recommend using are the Glyph of Wild Growth. The Glyph of Wild Growth gives your Wild Growth spell the ability to hit 1 extra target, increasing the number to 6. The Glyph of Rejuvenation. This glyph increases the amount healed by Rejuvenation by 50% if the target of the spell is below 50% health. And the Glyph of Swiftmend. This glyph will allow your Swiftmend spell to no longer consume a Rejuvenation or a Regrow spell from your target. Other options available for Restoration Druids are Glyph of Healing Touch. This glyph decreases the cast time of Healing Touch by 1.5 seconds, the mana cost by 25%, and the amount healed by 50%. The Glyph of Life Bloom. It increases the duration of Life Bloom by 1 second. And the Glyph of Nourish. Your Nourish heals an additional 6% for each of your heal over time effects present on the target. These 3 glyphs are viable options to replace one of the 3 recommended glyphs, but they will not as greatly increase your healing output. On to minor glyphs. Minor glyphs are available in a wide array to druids. The only extremely important one to have is the Glyph of Unburden Rebirth. This glyph allows your Rebirth spell to no longer require a reagent. Another valuable minor glyph to use is the Glyph of the Wild. The Glyph of the Wild is great for buffing, as it reduces the mana cost of Mark of the Wild and Gift of the Wild by 50%. This will not only save mana and let you spend less time drinking to fill your mana back up, but it is also beneficial to have when you need to buff someone who has been the recipient of a combat resurrection. Other minor glyphs that I recommend are either the Glyph of Thorns, which increases the duration of Thorn's spell by 50 minutes when cast upon yourself, or the Glyph of Aquatic Form, which increases your swim speed while in aquatic form by an additional 50%. Gearing your druid for healing. This is how I rate stats in order of their benefit. Spell power, intellect and spirit, crit, and haste. Spell power is the bread and butter stat for druids. This is your most valuable healing output stat, and will always be on gear that you should desire to have. Intellect is a stat that is commonly and mistakenly frowned upon for restoration druids. Intellect both increases your mana pool, which in turn increases your regeneration from replenishment, but also increases your spell critical rating. When spec'd properly, druids gain spell power from spirit. Spirit also increases your out of combat mana and health regeneration. These 2 stats can be very tricky. You should never stack one at the expense of the other. Haste and crit are both very powerful stats, but stacking one over the other is generally not the best idea. It is best to reach the soft cap for haste before you begin looking for items with crit. The soft cap for haste is almost exactly 365. Having more of this stat is never a bad thing, but at the soft cap, your global cooldown is at 1 second. As I noted earlier, spell critical strikes will activate Nature's Grace, which increases spellcasting speed by 20%, and if you were lucky enough to have the 4-piece Tier 9 bonus, Rejuvenation now has the ability to crit. Gems. Gem slots can also be very tricky. I'll go over some recommendations for you to use in this part of the guide. I'm only going to cover epic gems, as they are actually quite easy to acquire via heroic dungeon emblem turn-ins or honor from PvP. For blue slots, you should always consider using the 12 spell power and 10 spirit gems. This gem is called the Purified Dreadstone. When you have a red slot for a gem, 23 spell power is the gem you should use. This gem is known as the Runed Cardinal Ruby. For yellow slots, you really have two options. The first is the Luminous Ametrine, which is 12 spell power and 10 intellect. The other option you have is the Reckless Ametrine, which is 12 spell power and 10 haste rating. I only recommend using the Reckless Ametrine if you were low on haste. For your meta gem, there are several options. The one that I use is the Insightful Earthsiege Diamond, which gives 21 intellect and has a chance to restore mana upon spellcast. Other meta gems you can use are the Ember Skyflare Diamond that gives 25 spell power and 2% intellect, and the Tireless Skyflare Diamond, which grants you 25 spell power and a slight increase to your run speed. For the next section of the guide, I'm going to cover what you should and shouldn't enchant your gear with. Starting off with your helm, you should acquire the Arcanum of Blissful Mending, which adds 30 spell power and 10 mana per 5 seconds to the item. This item is available at Revered from the Wormrest Accord. Alternatively, you can choose to use the Arcanum of Burning Mysteries, which gives 30 spell power and 20 critical strike rating to the helm slot. This is available from the Kirin Tor in Dalaran when you become Revered with the faction. Moving on to the shoulder slot, you should use items available from the Sons of Hodir faction. I choose to use the Greater Inscription of the Storm that adds 24 spell power and 15 critical strike rating. You may also choose to use the Greater Inscription of the Crag, which adds 24 spell power and 8 mana per 5 seconds. Both of these items are available once you are exalted with the Sons of Hodir. You have two options for your cloak as well. Enchant Cloak Greater Speed and Enchant Cloak Wisdom are both very viable options. I personally choose to go with Greater Speed because I find the 23 haste as being more beneficial than the 10 spirit and 2% threat reduction given by Wisdom. On your chest, the best and only enchant that you should use is Enchant Chest Powerful Stats. This gives you 10 points to all of your stats. For your leg enchant, you should use the Brilliant Spell Thread. Brilliant Spell Thread adds 50 spell power and 20 spirit to your pants. This is more beneficial than the Sapphire Spell Thread due to the fact that we will find stamina on all of our gear and the benefits from the spirit available on the Brilliant Spell Thread. For your boots, there are several options as to how you may enchant them. The enchant that I choose to use is Tusker's Vitality, which adds 15 stamina and a minor increase to your run speed. Other enchants that you may want to use are Enchant Boots Greater Spirit, giving 18 spirit, or Enchant Boots Greater Vitality, that adds 7 mana and health per 5 seconds to this slot. For all other items, you should enchant them with the highest available spell power enchant. That wraps up the guide for the Restoration Druid. Thanks for watching this movie. As always, feel free to ask questions or add suggestions either on YouTube or in the strategy thread on TankSpot.com. Also, TankSpot donors can download all of these movies in high definition directly from our servers. Click the second link in the movie information box to learn more.